Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we explore the mystery of the Taconic Parkway tragedy. There's something wrong with Aunt Diane. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest episode of the Prosecutors Podcast. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am joined, as always, with my magnificent colleague, Alice.
Hey, everyone. Your descriptors of me are just getting more and more flattering each time.
I know. Well, I think you called me illustrious in the last one, so
It's just true.
I feel like I gotta step up my game. Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Alice. That's not a lie. I'm not exaggerating. I'm very happy. It makes me happy.
It makes me happy.
It's a source
too.
of joy in these dark times that we're living through.
Hopefully they're getting less dark each day.
We can hope. We can hope. But to match the darkness of the times, we're going to do really what may be the most depressing story we do. We started with Lisa Lamb, which is a case that just makes me sad. I don't know. It just makes me sad. But this case is really just awful.
I'd say it's tragic because of all the people it affects.
It is so tragic. It really is. And it's not so much a mystery in the sense that we normally look into these. This is more a mystery of the mind, or maybe a mystery of the soul, if you want to get really philosophical. It's the story of a 36-year-old mother who was involved in a tragedy really of just unimaginable proportions. To give you some background, on July 26th, 2009, 36-year-old Diane Schuler drove her minivan with her son, her daughter, and 3 nieces the wrong way up the exit ramp onto the Taconic Parkway in New York. For 1.7 miles, she drove south in the northbound lane, reaching speeds of up to 80 miles per hour. That terrifying ride came to an end when she collided head-on with an oncoming SUV. 8 people, including Diane, her daughter, her nieces, and the 3 passengers in the SUV, were killed instantly. Her son was the only survivor. The case is remembered for a haunting statement one of her nieces made to her father during a desperate call for help. There's something wrong with Aunt Diane. And yeah, I mean, just from that description alone, I think you can see why this is such a tragic case. and one that's really haunted the people of this area of New York and the family of Diane for a very long time. Before we get into the story and really sort of break down what happened, I think we have to talk about the documentary first. The documentary is named There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane. If you haven't seen it, you can either stop this podcast now and go watch it or watch it after we finish talking about this. Alice and I watched it together. It's one of the best true crime documentaries I've ever seen. And one of the reasons for that is, and we're going to talk about this and how Diane's family views this case, but the documentary crew, it's easy to think that they are sort of pushing the family's agenda. But I think when you watch the documentary, you're going to see this really is sort of a detached, unbiased view of their effort to clear Diane's name and how that effort eventually fails. And I really had a lot of respect for the documentarians and how they pulled that off.
Right, because basically they don't get the answer that they want, but they don't try to manipulate it to say something it doesn't. It's very good
and I don't know
storytelling.
about you, but I kept thinking that at some point in the documentary, they were going to get the answer they want. And I think that's going back to what we said in the beginning. This is not so much a mystery. It's pretty clear what happened here. The details are fuzzy and we'll never know the exact details. But it really is about sort of the psychology of this and what was going on with her and what's going on with her family to this day. And that's one of the reasons that documentary is often held up as one of the best true crime documentaries. And I think it definitely is. But like I said, we'll talk about that more. But let's dive into the story a little bit first.
Sure. So, as Brett already told you, 8 people were killed when this minivan driven by Diane Schuler was traveling 1.7 miles in the wrong direction on the Taconic Parkway. She collided head-on with an oncoming SUV. As we noted, what's so tragic about this, with anyone who has kids or knows kids, were the young kids who died in this. Her daughter, her 3 nieces, and then, of course, Diane, and then the 3 innocent passengers in the other SUV.
And that's really where things take a turn for the unexpected.
And of course, when you're thinking, okay, what would cause a woman with young children to be driving the wrong way? I know the first thought I would have is, what was in her system? And so, of course, that's what investigators did in this case. They sent off for toxicology tests, and it showed that, almost unsurprisingly, Schuler was heavily intoxicated with both alcohol and marijuana at the time of the crash. But this is where it's strange, because if you're that heavily intoxicated, you would think that those around you may know. But she had just been with her husband, Daniel, and Daniel has consistently denied that she used drugs or alcohols excessively or that day. And he has come out in public multiple times to defend his wife and to call for further investigation about other possible medical causes for her erratic driving. And we'll dive into some of those other medical causes that it might be. But the toxicology tests are right there. Heavy use of alcohol and marijuana. So how much was it? Well, Schuler had an equivalent of 10 drinks in her system and high levels of THC in her blood. THC is what's in marijuana. And in addition, witnesses later reported seeing who they think is Schuler at 2 different times that morning on her knees by the side of the road, apparently vomiting. I've never had 10 drinks at once in my life.
I have a story to tell about that in a second.
Oh, man. I was going to say, well, this is actually going to be super interesting because, Brett and I are, we look different. I'm a pretty small, short lady. I could not carry 10 drinks. Brett is like the opposite. He's towering and he could. It'll be really interesting how, alcohol affects different people, men and women. But I know for me, I've never drank 10 drinks in one sitting or even throughout an entire day.
I would like to think that I bring a lot of experience to this particular case, so hopefully I can bring that to bear. Finally, all those college nights are worth it.
You were just doing your research for your podcast.
Exactly. And the crazy thing about this is we've talked about how she had 10 drinks in her system and how she had high levels of THC. If in your mind you're imagining that she was driving down the Taconic Parkway at 9:00 at night or something, or like midnight after a big party, that is not right. As a matter of fact, she was driving the kids home. The family had spent some time at the lake. We'll talk about that in a second. And this accident happens in the afternoon. And the only reason it happens in the afternoon is because Diane drives around for so long. I mean, she leaves the campsite where they are, I believe we're going to talk about the timeline, but I think at 9:30 in the morning. That just gives you an idea of what we've got going on here. So we talk about the 10 drinks thing. I have sort of a crazy story, and you'll see why it's crazy in a second. So during one of my previous stints as a prosecutor, I did I've prosecuted the lowest of the low. So I did Parkway tickets, actually. And part of the ticket docket were DUIs. So we had an officer come in with a breathalyzer. And the deal was we had all the prosecutors there who prosecuted these cases, and they wanted volunteers to essentially drink for the hour while they were demonstrating how this thing works, and then take the breathalyzer and do the sobriety test and everything. So of course I volunteered. And in that hour, I think I drove. I drove. I haven't been drinking today, I promise. In that hour, I think I drank at least 10 drinks, because I know I had.
Really?
Yeah. And this was at a government.
You're like really committed
event.
to this.
We had to sign like a medical release and everything, and something saying we wouldn't drive for the rest of the day, like all this stuff. But I know I had 8 shots of bourbon, because what I did was I took one of my stadium cups from college. I just did this up, right? And did the old bourbon and Coke thing. So I did like 4 shots for the first drink, and then 4 shots. And then I had a double shot of vodka, and then I had like another drink. I can't remember what it was. So it was at least 10 drinks in an hour. And then basically you waited for like 15 minutes so it would all sort of get into your system and do the breathalyzer. And I will tell you this, the thing that surprised me the most, and the thing that really sort of opened my eyes to DUI, you think of 0.08 as being relatively low. And I think for some people it probably is, but not for me, because I blew like 0.11.
Really?
So even with all those drinks, that
you were
quickly,
barely above.
I was barely above. And I'm kind of proud of this. I don't know if I should be proud of this, but I actually passed all the roadside sobriety tests. So anyway,
maybe you're just really good at
drinking,
maintaining your alcohol, which might be relevant for this particular case.
Yeah, actually,
that would not be me.
Actually, I think it is, because I've thought about this case a lot through the lens of my own experience, and I actually do have some ideas about what happened with her. But here's the thing: 0.19 is really high, right? I mean, that's really high, but it's not as high as I would have expected for someone who did what she did.
And by the way, she did blow, or she would have blown a 0.19. That's fair, because I know there are stories of people doing kind of crazy things, but it's not like just because you are incredibly drunk do you do something like drive 80 miles the wrong direction for nearly 2 miles with your most prized possessions in your car with you.
Exactly.
I don't think it automatically explains it.
I'm just going to read sort of the description of what to expect at the level that Diane was at. And I think this, like I said, sort of goes to my surprise. Now, the reason we say 10 drinks is because for Diane, she's a woman. Her body weight she was 204 pounds. Let me just go through the doctor who performed the autopsy, and then I'll come back to this BAC stuff, because I feel like maybe we're talking about this with you guys, and you may not actually know anything about this case. So the autopsy was performed by Alexander Milovanovich, who reported that Diane had both a significant amount of THC in her system, to the point that she could have been smoking marijuana as soon as 15 minutes before this crash occurred, and a blood alcohol content of 0.19, which is where they get the 10 drinks, because for a woman her weight, every drink is about 0.02. So 10 drinks get you up to 0.2. According to the autopsy, Diane weighed 204 pounds. It's believed that she was drinking vodka because a large handle size of vodka was found in her car. If we say she started drinking at 11:30, and we're going to go through the timeline here, but that's kind of what people think. I actually don't necessarily disagree with this, but we'll talk about why. After she left the gas station that she started out, and when people started reporting, there were a lot of reports that came in about this, that there was this minivan driving erratically. She would have had to have had 10 vodka drinks to get her blood alcohol limit up to 0.19, which is about a shot every 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I've also heard, and I've never really understood this aspect of it, that in addition to her blood alcohol level, there was a significant amount of alcohol still in her stomach. So the idea is that she may have drank well more than that, but it had not yet been processed.
That's a lot of alcohol.
It is a lot of alcohol. But, and I want us to think about this as we sort of go through this, and we think about the theories, and we think about what people have said about this case. At sort of where I was at when I did that over 0.01, that's when you're starting to see the effects of alcohol. You are starting to lose coordination, and you're starting to take chances, and your speech is starting to slur, and your balance and your coordination is failing, and your reaction time is going down, which is one of the worst parts about driving drunk. Even at that relatively low level, you just can't react as quickly. 0.02, though, we're up there, but we're not, like I said, we're not as bad as you would think it would take. So severe impairment, increased impairment is considered 0.06 to 0.15, which is one reason some people want to drop the limit from 0.08 to 0.06, because that's when you start getting that increased impairment that really affects your ability to drive. Severe impairment is 0.16 to 0.3. Now, 0.3, that's a whole point above where Diane was. And then life-threatening is 0.3 to 0.45. If you get to 0.45, you're going to die. But severe impairment, that's when you start getting into this, almost falling down drunk circumstance. We're losing consciousness. You're throwing up. You really, you are, when you think of people being really drunk, that's when you're there. Based on Diane's blood alcohol level, she's in that range, but she's at the low end of that range. And it does make you question, was she drunk enough that alone would lead her to go up, to not only turn up the wrong way on the exit ramp, but to drive on the wrong side of the road on a highway going 80 miles an hour for over a mile, almost 2 miles. And that's if you want a mystery about this case, that's a mystery to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for breaking that down, because I'm not sure I even knew the breakdowns of each of those. And, another thing just to note, okay, so we're just talking about someone who's had 10 drinks and smoked a lot of marijuana. Also think about who this is. There's a picture of her you can see online. She just looks like your typical housewife mom. Now, she wasn't a housewife. She actually worked outside of the home. But, she by all accounts, was just a happy-go-lucky mom. She doesn't look like she has a dark side.
And a very successful person.
Yeah, very successful person who's driven.
Like you said, she works out of the home, but she's actually an executive at a company. She's making a 6-figure salary. if you watch the documentary, she's one of those people who the people who talk in that documentary are almost jealous of her, right? Like how she kept all her kids in order and how they were always perfectly dressed and ready for every school event. And she's doing all this while she's essentially, the main breadwinner for the family. So she's both the perfect housewife and the perfect mom and the successful executive.
Right. So we talked a lot about this, but let's actually break down the timeline because I think it's really interesting when you see what her day breaks down as. So she and her husband take her kids and their 3 nieces to the Hunter Lake campgrounds in Parksville, New York for just a weekend camping trip. And apparently this is very typical of what they do on the weekends. This is not their first time here. They come often. As usual, around 5 or 6 in the morning, so really early before even the kids are up, Diane and her husband Daniel wake up so that they can clean his boat to get ready to leave for the day. Then at 7 a.m., Diane wakes up the kids. So again, it's her son Brian, who's 5 years old, her daughter Erin, who's 2, and then her nieces Emma, who's 8, Allison, who's 7, and Kate, who's 5, and their last name is Hance. So we're talking really young kids, all under the age of 8. That's early to wake up kids, by the way. I would let them sleep. and soon after that, really, at 9:30, they've already camped up, they've already packed up their car, and the family leaves the campsite. With that many kids and that much gear, they have 2 cars going. Daniel is in his pickup with all the luggage and their dog, and Diane is in her brother's minivan with all of the children.
And, it's just one of those mornings. I'm sure you guys out there with families, with a couple kids, this is the kind of thing you've done 1,000 times, right? And there's nothing to make you think that this morning is going to be any different than any other morning. And like Alice said, this is something they did often, something they did pretty much every weekend. This is a route that Diane has driven, so many times she probably could do it in her sleep. And so that day they leave at 9:30. They go to Liberty, New York, and that's where they stop at a McDonald's at 9:56. We have security video that shows the children are eating, they're playing in the playground. The cashier was interviewed and said Diane seemed perfectly normal, and that apparently she ordered a large orange juice and an iced coffee. And remember that, we're going to come back to it. At around 10:33, they leave McDonald's. That's a while to be at McDonald's, but I assume it's because the kids were playing. At 10:46, this is a moment that a lot of people point to. Schuler gets gas, and she goes into the gas station and asks a clerk for some gel cap pain pills, which were apparently her brand that she liked to use. And the store doesn't carry those. And so Schuler says, okay, fine, and leaves. And the employees said she seemed perfectly normal. So at 10:58, they leave the gas station and head south on Route 17.
So soon after, at 11:37, this is in the Middletown area, with Schuler's phone, Emma calls her dad, Warren Hance, who's at work at the time in Floral Park, and says in just about a 47-second conversation that they might be a little bit late. Diane speaks to Warren and says nothing worrisome. And Emma at that time doesn't say anything worrisome either.
And my understanding is the expectation was they would be home around noon. So it makes sense. It's 11:40-ish. You're going to be late. You call to let somebody know.
Now, sometime between 11:30 and noon, so remember this call falls in between that, there are reports of a red minivan, and Diane's driving a red minivan, that's being seen driving aggressively on Route 17 in Orange County. At 11:45, another witness says that she sees a woman who looks like and is dressed like Diane, and she's wearing a black long-sleeve t-shirt and short pants, bent over on the side of Route 7 as if she's vomiting, and this is just outside of Middleton. That witness later says that a minivan passes her car and continues to zig in and out of traffic pretty aggressively.
And that's interesting because you have this witness who sees somebody throwing up, and then apparently, if it's Diane, she's driving so fast that even though this witness passed her, she manages to pass her.
Right. Now, at 12:08 p.m., Jackie Hance, who's the mother of the nieces, calls Diane's cell. They talk for less than 2 minutes, and according to Jackie, nothing seems wrong. And it's likely that at this point, Diane tells Jackie that they're running late. Again, if they're supposed to be home by 12, it's just a little bit after 12, so this makes sense. Now, Diane has driven this route many times because, like we said, they go to this campground often. For whatever reason, she's running late, so she knows that she's running late. And at 12:13, about 5 minutes after that, the van goes through Harriman Toll Plaza. Between 12:15 and 12:45, witnesses say they see a red minivan with children driven by a dark-haired woman weaving aggressively through traffic, straddling lanes and blowing their horn. And this is southbound throughway from Harriman to Sloatsburg. This goes back to, that first witness who said that she saw a van zigzagging aggressively in and out of traffic.
And it's so interesting. You have the witnesses who are reporting what they're seeing, and they're seeing this very aggressive driving, speeding, the kind of things that you would expect from someone who maybe has been drinking. But then you have the people who are talking to Diane on the phone and the people who are seeing Diane at stores and other places. And they're all saying, oh, she seemed perfectly fine, which I actually don't think is inconsistent at all with somebody who knows how to drink, frankly. So now we're in the Sloatsburg area. Between 12:15 and 12:45, you have more witnesses who are seeing this red minivan. One witness sees this red minivan pulled over just north of a service area, and it describes something we've heard from other witnesses, which is a woman fitting Diane's description, sitting on the guardrail, appearing to be ill. Another witness says that this minivan re-enters the highway and immediately begins tailgating him. And this person is driving so aggressively that the van actually tries to pass him on the shoulder and then blows its horn at him for 1 mile.
It's a long time to blow your horn.
That is a long time. That's a minute at 60.
You're like laying, you have to lay on that horn.
Even at 90,
my hand would cramp
it's 30 seconds. I know, of just blowing your horn.
And it's really aggressive.
Very aggressive. And frankly, one thing that I think surprises me a little bit, but maybe shouldn't, is that nobody at any point until very late in the day calls the police and says, hey, we got this crazy minivan. Now, look, it's New York. Maybe this is just what people are used to. So, but this witness pulls over to get out of the way and goes to McDonald's, and the van actually follows and heads towards the truck parking area in this little service area, which if you've ever been up to the Northeast, they have service areas off the highway that also have like a McDonald's, and they have a gas station, sort of a monopoly, state enforced monopoly or whatever. But anyways, sees this van head off into the truck parking area and then drive over a grassy area that sort of divides the truck parking from the car parking, and parks in the car parking area. That's around in between 12:15 and 12:45. We know that at 12:55 p.m., Diane is now in the area of the Tappan Zee Bridge. You have a 17-second call from Schuler's phone, which is to a wrong number. At 12:58, Diane calls Jackie Hance at home, and this is the first time that the people who are getting phone calls from her start to notice something's off. There's a report that says that Hance said that she sounded out of it. They have a 2.5-minute call, but it ends abruptly when the signal drops. At this point, people are starting to get concerned. We're about an hour late at this point. Diane seems like she's out of it. At around 1 o'clock, Warren arrives home, essentially right as this telephone call is ending. So he calls Diane back. And they speak for about 8 minutes as Schuler is going over the Tappan Zee Bridge and through the toll. The Hanses have been understandably reluctant to really speak to anyone about this, so you kind of have to look at the reports. We don't really have any, first-person interviews with them. But according to the reports about this call, Diane sounded disoriented, and Emma, who was Warren's daughter, gets on the phone, and Diane actually pulls over. So Emma's upset. She says she's all right. She says she sees a sign for Terrytown and Sleepy Hollow, and she tells her father there's something wrong with Aunt Diane. Now, at this point, interestingly, Diane gets back on the phone and Warren says, hey, just wait where you are. I will come get you. I will come meet you. This is a critical moment. At this point, Diane says everything is fine. The kids are happy and playing. And, this is the image of normalcy. Everything is fine. So that's it. Around 1:01, they have this telephone call. At around 1:10, someone in the minivan dials 4 wrong numbers in 1 minute. At that point, Schuler leaves her phone, what's later described as neatly, on a concrete barrier in a pull-off area just past the tolls and drives away. Now, we're going to come back to this moment because this is such a critical moment, but I just want to remind you that at this point, Diane has stopped the car. She's off the road. Hance knows where she is. He can come get her. But instead, she leaves that phone on that concrete barrier and drives away. At that point, as you can imagine, Warren Hance is very concerned. He's calling the phone. It goes to voicemail. And there are about a dozen other calls. They go to voicemail over the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, that really is so bizarre. It's like there are so many points in this story where it could have ended differently. And the leaving the phone behind thing is really bizarre because I don't know about you. If I'm leaving my phone, if I'm intentionally leaving my phone somewhere, which I've never done because my phone is an extension of my arm, I expect never to get it back. It's not like I'm going to come back for it later. It's like, forget it. Like, I'm not coming back for it.
And like I said, this is such a critical moment, and it's a moment we're probably going to come back to again and again and again as we talk about this. But, putting your mind or putting yourself in anyone's mind is always difficult. And we talked about this with Elisa Lam, where you're dealing with mental illness. Here, you're dealing with substance abuse. You're dealing with someone who's had a lot to drink. So trying to imagine what she's doing and what she's thinking and what's motivating her in that moment, it's tough. And it's particularly tough to do when you haven't had 10 shots of vodka in an hour. But yeah, it's bizarre and it's sad, and it really is. It's a tragic moment because if she had just stayed there, none of us would even know anything about Diane Schuler.
And now, it takes us to Mount Pleasant. So sometime after 1:30 p.m., Diane turns right from Pleasantville Road onto an exit ramp for the Taconic Parkway, but it's heading the wrong way. She drives south into northbound traffic for 1.7 miles, forcing more than a dozen motorists to swerve out of the way because she is just going straight. Nothing is stopping her. And at 1:35 p.m., the minivan smashes head-on into an SUV, carrying 3 Yonkers men to a family party.
And the documentary does such a good job of laying this all out. And I hope all of you will go watch it. It's available on Amazon. If you have Prime, it's free. If you don't have Prime, it's worth purchasing. Because you hear these calls. You hear 911 calls that are coming from these people who are swerving out of the way of Diane, describing what they're seeing. And some of those people are interviewed. And what they all say is that Diane is driving with a purpose. She is, she's not weaving in her lane. She's not doing any of the things you might imagine alcoholics do or someone who's drunk driving does. You always hear about how drunk drivers often drive very slowly and very carefully because in their mind, they're trying to act normal. Well, she's not doing that. She's going 80 miles an hour straight as an arrow in the fast lane going the wrong way. And all these cars are dodging her as she's doing this until finally she comes up on somebody who can't dodge her. And she smashes into them head on and kills everybody in that van and would have killed her son were it not for some people who immediately stopped, jumped out of their car, and pulled everybody out of that van because it eventually burst into flames and is burned up. Her son absolutely would have died had those people not acted as quickly as they did. And listening to them talk about pulling those girls out of that van, oh man, I mean, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it really is. You prepare yourself before. It's a great documentary, but it's rough.
But these are real lives lost, and it's devastating.
And essentially what happens after that, obviously this is a huge tragedy. It's the worst wreck in the history of the Taconic Parkway. Everybody wants to know what's happened. You know, people are speculating, did she have a stroke? Did she have some sort of, epileptic seizure? Like, what could have led to this? And obviously, when those toxicology reports come out, it's just outrage. And the family reacts, I guess, in the way you would react. You try and put yourself in their shoes. They don't believe it. They just can't believe it. They can't believe that Diane would do that she would drink that much alcohol, that she would smoke marijuana, that she would get into her car with those kids in the back in that state. They just can't believe it. And so they launch this effort to try and disprove it. And the documentary, it follows that effort. And I got to tell you, there's one scene, before we get into sort of the weirdness about this case and some of our theories, there's one scene, they go to see Dr. Warner Spitz, who is famous in true crime because it seems like he's involved in every famous true crime case. And they have the autopsy reports, and they're trying to prove that this isn't Diane, or maybe they submitted the wrong test or whatever. And they bring these to Warner Spitz, and I think they expect him to say, oh, it could have been this or it could have been that. And he doesn't do that. I mean, he basically says, the tests say what the tests say. It looks like she was really drunk. And that's what the tests say. And you have to come to terms with that. Diane's husband and his sister, who are the main people in the documentary, they leave. And I don't know if you remember this, Alice, but there's this point where the lady is outside and she's smoking cigarettes, and she's just talking about how she can't believe this and this can't be right. And at some point she says, no one in my family knows I smoke. And it was such a striking moment in this documentary where
she hit it on its head.
Exactly. And didn't even know it. Didn't even know sort of what she was saying. So let's just dive into that. I mean, was Diane an alcoholic? Her family all say she never drank. Her friends say she drank a little bit, but she didn't get drunk.
I mean,
her
that's
husband
classic.
says,
That's classic alcoholism, right?
It is.
People don't know that you drink.
It is. It is. Particularly for someone
and that is
like
what's
Diane.
Sad. And let's talk about Diane for a second. You said she was an executive. I mean, she is the breadwinner of the family. She is high achieving. She is described by everyone who knows her as on the ball, someone you can depend on, a leader, a great mom who, kind of is the quintessential mom who is always there for her kids. Her kids have, I imagine she's the type of mom who writes cute little notes and jokes on her kids' napkins that get put in their lunchboxes. And, she's just an amazing mom, and everyone keeps saying that about her. And so this isn't to disparage her as a mom or a woman or an executive. This is to say that it was completely unexpected for her to be struggling with alcoholism, and I don't know what else, but I think that's partly why the family's so offended. They're not just shocked. It's one thing if there was shock, they're not even shocked, they're angry. And I think it's because they think it's an attack on who she was, that it erases somehow all the good that she was.
That's a really good point. They're so defensive of her and angry that people would accuse her of this. And it's an interesting question. Is she an alcoholic? Does she fit the medical profile of an alcoholic? And I think sometimes we get maybe a little too tied up into that, because I think you can abuse alcohol and you can allow alcohol to become a crutch without being an alcoholic. But that's the kind of behavior that I think can lead you into where Diane got, because it seems like that the way Diane dealt with stress, even if she wasn't an alcoholic, the way she dealt with stress was to drink. And you think about this, Alice and I joke a lot about our kids, but I mean, just imagine, Alice, if you've got, what, 4 screaming children, 5 screaming children?
5 screaming kids.
5 screaming kids in your minivan that you're driving back from the lake. I mean, you could imagine Diane being like, man, I just need a drink. I just need a drink to get through this. And sort of, one thing kind of leads to another.
And maybe it was an exhausting weekend. I mean, we don't know. Maybe it wasn't. But being in charge of 5 kids, we've been joking about quarantine and staying home with our kids all day, but it really is. You're exhausted by the end of the day, and taking on, 3 more kids. I know she often did this, but, maybe she was exhausted from the weekend. But, back to your question about whether she's an alcoholic, one thing I want to note is I think the answer is more likely yes than not because of the amount of alcohol she had. If she were just a social drinker, I would think you wouldn't drink that much, because I noted earlier that I have never drank 10 drinks in one sitting. And I probably wouldn't right now, because I don't know if that would actually kill me or make me black out or, fill in the blank. Because I don't know how it would affect me. I probably wouldn't do it because I don't have experience in drinking that much alcohol. Now, if she's driving, I think she loves her kids. I don't think she's trying to necessarily get drunk. But if she's comfortable enough to drink that much alcohol while she's operating a car with her precious kids and nieces in it, I think it's because she's done it time and time again before, and she was able to function at that level of alcohol and marijuana. So
I think you're absolutely right.
Actually I think that points to her having done this many times before.
I think she probably did this every weekend. I think every weekend when she was driving those kids home, she was drinking, and she just never drank this much, or circumstances never aligned this way. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about sort of our theories, but I think you're absolutely right. I think this was not a one-off thing for her.
There's something else to discuss, because remember we said that the family has adamantly denied any sort of alcoholism, and they've looked for other medical explanations. So what possibly could be another medical explanation when the toxicology report clearly shows alcohol and THC in her system? Well, the family has put forth that, and her friends have said that she was constantly holding her lower jaw. And dental records actually show she had problems with a tooth for years, but she hated going to the dentist. It may have been, there's a theory out there that it might have been an abscess tooth that caused her an immense amount of pain. So much so that when she was going into the gas station, she was actually asking for drugs for that abscess tooth. And remember, they didn't carry the brand that she liked to take. And so if the pain was that bad, maybe she was trying to dull the pain herself with marijuana, with alcohol, just kind of to, not much longer to home. I can get there. I just need something to get me through this intense pain while kids are, screaming in the back.
Right. And look, I mean, that's what people do, right? The whole joke about, in the Western movies, before they cut the bullet out, they give the guy a swig of tequila. So maybe she thought, they don't have my brand, maybe the vodka can help. And I'll tell you, I had a cracked filling, and so I ended up having an abscess tooth because no one noticed. Oof. Because I had a filling, and so it just sort of happened. And while I was waiting to get a root canal, there was only one, and I don't know why this is. I guess this is maybe just your body chemistry or whatever. There was only one pain medication that worked. Anything else was just a waste of time. I mean, if I took aspirin or Aleve or whatever, it was worthless. It was not going to do anything for me. But if I took this one kind of pain medication, the pain would go away, at least for a little while. And I just wonder, was that it? Was it she had discovered sort of the drug that worked, and they didn't have that drug, so it wasn't a thing where she could just buy something else. She really needed that one thing, and when they didn't have it, the only thing she had to turn to was alcohol. And people point to this moment because it was after this that people started seeing the car swerving and the aggressive driving, and so they think this is when she started drinking. And that's probably the most charitable view of what happened that day.
And here's the thing, a very obvious question is, if you're in that much pain, why do you keep driving? But I think this goes to the type of person Diane is described to be. Giving up is not an option, right? And she has to, her job is to get these kids home. she's going to get them home. There's no such thing as pulling to the side of the road, burdening her brother or her husband to turn around, take a detour, and come pick them up, maybe in more than one car or something like that, because someone would have to drive a car, someone needs to drive that other car home, and then drive the minivan. It would just cause a lot of trouble. So while it may seem like, well, if you're in that much pain, why not just stay in the parking lot? Someone will come get you. But I can imagine she's so high achieving, she's probably not used to asking for help. And what's the big deal? It's like, I'm 40 minutes away from home. I can make it. I can grin and bear it.
And once she starts drinking, then that becomes, it's not even an option anymore, right? Because she has a secret to hide. She can't call for help at that point. She can't let her brother-in-law or her brother meet her at the turnoff, because if he shows up, he's going to see that she's wasted and her secret will be out. And, you know, even as drunk as she was, that was the one thing she couldn't let happen. Yeah, there was no asking for help for her. So the next question people have is, why did it take so long for her to get home? And this sort of goes to what Alice just said. She should have been home by noon. Why did this happen? You know, this is one of those things where you really can only throw out speculation. Maybe she took a wrong turn. Maybe she got lost. Maybe she was so drunk that she forgot where she was going, or, you know,
or maybe she was distracted from the pain.
Yeah, distracted from the pain.
After a long day, I drive the same straight shot home every single day. There are times where I'm like, how did I take the wrong exit today? I always take the right exit because I was thinking about something, something else, and I've blanked out.
Right. The other option is that at some point she kind of realizes that she's had too much to drink and she needs to kind of drive around for a little while to work it off. I think that's a possibility as well. But yeah, I think you're probably right. I think a combination of the pain or the stress or the distractions or whatever was the initial cause that maybe led her to miss a turn or go the wrong direction. And then I think there might have been some of this, I can't show up right now. I need to chill, sober up a little bit.
And you know what I wonder though? You say she might be driving around trying to sober up. She may have been throwing up because she was drunk, or she may have been trying to make herself throw up to get sobered up quicker.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
I don't know that, but that certainly happened in college. If someone needed to sober up because they wanted to drive, always a bad idea. You shouldn't do it. People would go pull the trigger and go throw up to try and make themselves sober up faster.
And it's possible, marijuana affects different people in different ways. Maybe one of the things it typically did for her was make her feel sober. So that's a possible reason why maybe she was smoking marijuana, was to kind of try and sober up. Who knows?
Yeah. And maybe the aggressive driving after the throwing up was throwing up to try and get sober, and she knows she's running late. It's kind of like both. Like, I got to sober up. Dang it, I'm late. And driving really aggressively.
And, we were talking about how she can't call her brother because she doesn't want him to know what she's done. And that kind of leads into another thing that people, and particularly her family, always point to, and that's the she would never. Diane would never get into a car with those kids drinking like that. She would never do that. And I think her sister-in-law actually says that at some point during the documentary. People call this the she would never phenomenon, or the he would never phenomenon. And over at True Crime Murder Mysteries, which is a podcast I listen to, he talks about this a lot, that people have this notion that this is a real thing. And in reality, most people in the right circumstances will do just about anything. And you never know people as well as you think you do. And that is particularly true with people who have struggles with substance abuse. It's almost cliche. It is almost cliche to say that, of course, her family would think that. If she were an alcoholic, they absolutely would believe she would never do that because she's hiding it from them. Had this tragedy not happened, and instead Diane somehow made it home, that could have been sort of the come to Jesus moment. She could have pulled up in her brother's driveway and he's seen the state she was in, and all of a sudden light bulbs go off and everybody realizes Diane's got a problem. We need to help her. But they never got to that point. So instead we have this sort of she would never phenomenon. And I think it just goes right in with this notion that she probably had a problem with substance abuse.
And the problem here with the she would never phenomenon is she did.
Right.
You know, there's alcohol in her system. She drove the wrong way. She crashed the car.
Right. And it's like, you know, there's the evidence and there's what you want to believe. And when those two things collide as violently as they do in this case, you can't just say she would never. You have to give into the evidence at some point. And I think that's what Dr. Spitz was trying to tell the family. And I don't know if they will ever have that realization or not.
Right. So then kind of the question that follows from that is, did Diane do this on purpose? The witnesses who saw her driving aggressively say that she was driving straight in as an arrow. She never swerves, not like your typical drunk driver, and that she almost looked serene. That's kind of a striking picture. And, you know, one other thing I would note is they do say that she's zigzagging in and out of lanes, not necessarily swerving. Swerving I associate with being impaired. Zigzagging actually takes some skill. You know, when an aggressive driver on the highway actually has skill because they're not hitting people. And I think it goes to the fact that this isn't her first time driving drunk. That she probably could pass field sobriety tests like you did, Brett, when you had 10 drinks in an hour.
Yeah, she probably could. She'd done it enough that she probably could.
And I want to say, I mean, you know, did she do it on purpose? As a mom myself, it's hard to believe that if you were under so much stress and you wanted to end it for yourself, that you would take your children and your little nieces along with you. That I find that really, really hard to believe. Again, but you know, she loved her kids. She did everything for her kids. She clearly loved her nieces too. I mean, she didn't have to take them along for their family camping trips, and it seems like she often did.
Yeah, you know, this is one I just choose to believe that she didn't do it on purpose. People do this kind of stuff. I mean, everybody knows the stories of the moms who drive their car into the lake with their kids strapped in the back seat and leave them to drown, right? I mean, it happens. And so it's possible. I don't think you can totally discount it. The one thing I will say is I think the evidence points much more convincingly to she was really drunk and behaving like a really drunk, high person and doing something incredibly stupid that she might not even realize what she was doing and tragedy occurred. I think all the evidence just points to that. Now look, if she was unhappy with her life, alcohol reduces inhibitions. It makes you not think clearly. Is it possible that under this much alcohol, like we said, she's only at 0.19. She's not at 0.3. I don't think you can rule it out. I don't think you can say definitively that she did not decide, you know what, I'm going to drive 80 miles an hour the wrong way until something happens. It's possible. And I wish we could say definitively that that's not what happened, but I just don't think we can. So the other thing I want to ask before we get to our theories and what we think happened is, what is everyone hiding? The main source of information we have in this case is the documentary. And while the documentarians do a very good job of maintaining, I think, an unbiased view, they can't help the fact that their main sources of information are the family. So a lot of the things we've told you have come from the family. You know, my understanding is even the fact that she stopped at the store for medication does not come from the police. It comes from the family's private investigator, who himself has some issues. So
that's a really good point, because this video actually has no sound. So when we say that she asked for medication, we actually don't know that. We see that she kind of briefly stops, looks around, talks for a second to the clerk. But I don't think it's the clerk who tells us that she asked for medication, right?
Well, so the clerk, What we're told by the private investigator, and we're not even told by him, we're told by the family who says that the clerk told him, even though they didn't tell the police this, that she was there for pain medication.
That's a lot of telephoning.
It is. One thing some people have speculated is that she wasn't there for pain medication, that what she actually asked him was, do you have any wine coolers, or do you have this kind of alcohol or that kind of alcohol? And he says no, and so she leaves. Well, we don't know, but like I said, our only source of information is the family, and the family is trying to build a narrative. And that narrative is that this pain was so bad that it caused a stroke, or it caused her to drink to try and numb the pain, and that sort of her culpability here is lessened because of that. So you have to look at everything, through that lens. The family tells us she was perfectly happy, they had a perfect marriage, and all that other stuff. The New York Post has done a lot of reporting on this, some better than others. But they reported that there was a bar near where Diane worked, and she would often stop there. And her drink of choice were screwdrivers. And she would drink screwdrivers and complain about her marriage. So cycle back all the way to the beginning of this story. She goes to McDonald's. She orders a large orange juice, screwdrivers, vodka, and orange juice. It's not hard to think that what happened is she didn't start drinking when she left the store, that gas station, which, like I said, helps the family because they can kind of use that as she was trying to numb the pain. But in reality, she went to McDonald's, she got herself a large orange juice, and that large orange juice quickly became a screwdriver that probably became more and more vodka as she went along.
And, we've kind of noted this a few times, but she's the breadwinner in the family. That may have led to a lot of stress within the marriage. I don't know, but we do know that she was the main salary earner there.
And it does sometimes. I mean, I've always told my wife, if she can make more money than me, great. If I can retire and stay home with the kids, that's ideal. But I know
we both fight about who gets to stay home with the kids. We both want
exactly, exactly. But I know there's a lot of men who don't feel that way, who feel like part of their sort of value in society is being that breadwinner, and it bothers them. And this doesn't make them bad people. It just bothers them that they can't do that. And maybe that was part of it. I mean, maybe that was causing stress. It's hard to say, but I do think that Diane put a lot of effort and energy into projecting this image of perfection. And behind that, there were a lot of problems. And I think a lot of those problems she dealt with using alcohol. So look, I think we've covered pretty much all the facts. We talked about the timeline, we talked about the documentary and some of the things that are going on in the background here. Alice, do you want to sort of give us your theory of what you think happened that day?
I suspect that our theories are going to be very similar, but I think that Diane was drunk that day, and I think it was not the first time that she had drank that much alcohol and was driving. I think she regularly did it to the point where she probably was an alcoholic. And I don't know why she did it. I don't know if it was dull pain or because kids were screaming, but I think this was something she had done many times before because of what I mentioned of my own experience. I don't think she had a death wish. I just think she dealt with the stresses in her life with alcohol. Now, one interesting thing is, there was so much THC in her blood that she could have been smoking as recently as 15 minutes before the crash. That sticks out to me because if she's trying to hide all of this, you can hide a screwdriver in a McDonald's orange juice cup. It's really hard to hide a blunt from kids. So that confuses me. And I think that she typically did not smoke the marijuana. I think maybe she started to figure out something was wrong and was trying to do something about it to sober up with the marijuana. And that may have been kind of the element that she'd never inserted before. And it resulted in this devastating crash.
I think you're right. Like you said, our theories are going to be pretty similar. One thing, the family, their story kind of changed over time. First, it was she never drank. And then it was, well, yeah, we would have, margaritas or something. Some drink that doesn't actually use vodka, they said, they would have every now and then at the campsite. And then it was like, oh, marijuana? What are you talking about? And then it was, well, she would occasionally smoke marijuana at night to wind down. So I think it is possible that she did, drink during the day and she would smoke marijuana at night to wind down. And that for some reason she did combine those this time. It's well known that marijuana does tend to increase the effect of alcohol on people. And that could explain why her behavior seems much worse than someone whose blood alcohol level is 0.19, which is high. I mean, it's very high, but it's not, maybe as high as you would have expected. And maybe it is because she was smoking marijuana and she wasn't used to that. So, Alice, I'll ask you a personal question, and you can refuse to answer if you want to.
Go for it, Brett.
Have you ever blacked out from drinking?
I honestly have never. I think I've previously said this. I was kind of a rule follower in college, and I actually did not drink until I was 21. And by the time I could drink when I was 21, it was like not fun to get blackout. It was more of a freshman year of college thing. So I've honestly never blacked out. Have you?
So I have, and it's this is where I want to bring sort of my experience into this. I mean, it's been a very long time. Diane was drinking a lot for somebody in their mid-30s. But yeah, like maybe 3 times, in my entire life. And each one of those times, the same thing happened. I enjoy drinking. I like beer a lot. I'm a big fan of bourbon. Love bourbon. I really like gin and tonics. I really like margaritas. I like to drink. I just enjoy it. And because of that, I probably do drink more than I should. I don't typically get drunk, but I have a high tolerance because of that, because I'm used to drinking. And so what has happened to me with the blackout, those like 3 times, if it's even that, it might only be like 2 times. Each time I had no idea that I had been drinking that much. I had no idea that I was approaching that level. And it was seriously one of those things where everything's fine. Then you wake up the next morning and you're like, what happened? Right? And it's hard to even point to why it happened to you in the first place. And I'll tell you I do remember the first time it ever happened. I had given up alcohol for Lent. So I gave up alcohol for Lent, and then right after Lent, like the weekend afterwards, my roommates had a party. And so, I'm drinking. You
weren't used to drinking.
Like I normally do, but my tolerance was so much lower that just drinking normally led to me blacking out, which may say something about how much I was normally drinking. But anyways, and I kind of think something like that happened here. Like you were saying, Diane was used to doing this. She had done this before. It started off slow. It started off, one for the road that she drank in the van while they were driving home. And then it went to 2, and she got used to doing it, and it was no big deal. She never had a problem. She always got the kids home safe. Maybe something happened that weekend. Maybe she didn't eat enough the night before. Maybe she drank too much the night before. Maybe she had not ever smoked marijuana before. And for whatever reason, the amount she was drinking affected her in a way it had never affected her before. And that's what led to this event. That's sort of what I think probably happened.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I don't think that she meant for this to happen. And even though I personally have never blacked out, I did, I was in a sorority, and I picked up a lot of sorority sisters who were blackout. And you're right. Kind of the first thing they typically say in their blackout state is, I don't know how this happened. I don't think they were trying to get blackout, because it's not fun to be blacked out.
No.
Maybe it is some fun for some people, but it's kind of scary. No,
absolutely. I hate it. I feel whenever it happens the next day, I just feel so bad because you don't know what you did is the other thing, right? Like you don't know who you insulted or who you like said something stupid to or a girl you hit on. I mean, you just don't know. And yeah, I mean, every time it's happened to me, it's been like a real sort of, man, I need to really think about my life and sort of take a step back, type situation. So yeah, I don't think she meant to do this. And I don't think she did it on purpose. Like I said, I choose to believe that. I think, and this is not, look, you can condemn Diane if you want to. That's fine. You know, she got really drunk and really high and she killed a whole bunch of people. So I'm not one of those people who's going to say, don't judge Diane. You can judge her if you want to, but I don't think she did it on purpose. I think it was something that was sort of organic, that came from
and here's
this
the thing.
addiction
I think really any of us could be her. There's nothing special or about her that makes her stand out in a way that I can say, of course she became an alcoholic, or of course she was drinking and smoking and driving, of course she killed her family. Nothing like that about her life stands out that way.
No, you're right. And the fact of the matter is there's a whole lot of Dianes out there right now who have just never had this moment, or they, by the grace of God, got home okay. What is it? There's that old saying that like God watches over drunks in the United States of America or something. I mean, there's some like saying along those lines that basically speaks to this idea of these people who are doing these things, and up to this point, they haven't had this moment, and everything came together in the worst possible way that day. And I think you're right. If there's something to take away from this, it's that it really can happen to any of us. She wasn't on crack cocaine. She wasn't on PCP. She was drinking vodka and smoking pot. And that's a lot of people.
And we've talked a lot about Diane. Of course, this could have been a man too. And, like Brett said, any of us could be Diane. But one thing I do want to note is that, I've thought a lot about these issues. Back when I was in law school, I led our women's group on campus, and I think about women's issues a lot, especially because I'm in a profession that's dominated by men. Is that women oftentimes we drive ourselves to perfection, and we again, this is not alone for women, but I have done many studies, and kind of this drive for perfection sometimes leads to outcomes like alcoholism or decisions that could have been avoided. And, society also drives women to be perfect. So it's really society's fault. I'm going to blame men. I'm kidding. I'm not blaming men. But I do note that because I see that in myself, especially as a prosecutor, when most of the people I work with, police officers, law enforcement, other prosecutors, judges, opposing counsel, they're almost always men. And I know that I sometimes have a drive not to show any weakness in the courtroom or on the phone with law enforcement officers, because I recognize that I'm kind of in the minority and I want to make it look like I have it all together. So, I don't know what Diane was thinking, but I know that many, many women often feel the need to be perfect oftentimes, in her field, it was male-dominated too, especially kind of in maybe male-dominated fields.
So we'll leave you with the one bright light that comes out of this case. So 2 years after the crash, Jackie Hance, who had lost, her 3 daughters in this terrible accident, she didn't think she could have any more kids, and a world-renowned fertility specialist heard about this case and worked with her. And 2 years after the crash, she did give birth to a little girl. And in the aftermath of this, she also wrote a book about the tragedy that everybody should check out. It's called I'll See You Again. And I have to say, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine what it must take to be able to continue your life. I mean, my little girl, she's 8 months old right now, and I'm kind of tearing up even talking about this because I can't imagine what Jackie Hance and her husband went through in all this. And I'm so glad that little girl came into the world and that they've been able to, continue on even in the face of this immense tragedy.
Oh, that was a heavy ending, but
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that. I mean, like I said, all our cases are not going to be depressing. But this one is just something we wanted to talk about. It's not a case. It's a case that's well, I don't even know. I actually don't think it's that well covered in true crime just because there's not a whole lot of real mystery to it. So I think a lot of people kind of pass it over. The True Crime Garage guys do a good episode on this. You should check out. I can't remember if True Crime Murder Mysteries does one or not. That guy, I keep mentioning that podcast. It's so unique, just completely different from anything you've ever heard. So check that out, and maybe he does. But in any event, we'll try and pick something a little bit more uplifting, maybe something with just plain old murder and mayhem for the next show. But I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to this story with us today. Like I said, check out this fantastic documentary, There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane. As always, let us know the mistakes we've made. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod on Twitter and Instagram, and our website where we'll have a few links, prosecutorspodcast.com. Well, Alice, it's been a pleasure as always.
You too, Brett. You too. No, this is always.
I mean, I say it's been a pleasure.
No,
I don't know. I guess it's been a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure getting to record with you, and this is always the favorite part of my day.
Oh, well, I can't wait until next time. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. On July 26th, started that over. On July, I'm glad this isn't live. On July 26th,
you're doing great.
2009.
Stop laughing! I didn't even say anything funny.
I know.
I'm just kidding. You can laugh all you want.
You're being encouraging. See, this is why it's good. It's not live. It's not live.
That's right.